Thanks for being here. My name is Andy Meyer. I am the director of the F.M. Johnson Archives and Special Collections here at North Park University. Today, I'm kind of doing double duty. I'm going to be a moderator of the discussion, and I'll also be one of the presenters. So I'll introduce myself, and then I'll kind of do the bulk of the presentation today. But as moderator, I have a few housekeeping notes. The event will be recorded, and it'll be made available afterwards. So if you want to share it with a friend, feel free. Um, if you could keep yourself muted until the question and answer time, then feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. And then I'll try to monitor the chat throughout the thing, throughout the presentation. So if you have questions or technical problems, you can put them in the chat as well. So this is actually the third installment of a series of online events created to mark 90 years of the Covenant Archives and Historical Library. So the work of the archives, so organizing, describing, preserving records of lasting historical significance, that's been happening for 90 years. 90 years, at least in a formal capacity, but in various other capacities, in basements, attics, closets, all over North Park, Covenant headquarters, local Covenant churches, in a whole bunch of different ways. So this work's been happening for far longer than the Covenant Archives has officially existed. And I'm very proud to have the title of archivist. But the work I do here in Chicago is supported by the work that happens all over by administrators, pastors, missionaries, um, church secretaries, administrative people. So the work that we do here in Chicago in the official archives is supported across the board by hundreds of people, too many to name here. These records are the critical building blocks of what Zenas Hawkinson talked about as the confluence of events and people that is the reality of the Covenant Church on the congregational, regional, national, or international levels. So, part of me wants to end there and saying the archives is the most important thing in the Covenant Church. But the point of the archives is not to have books neatly arranged on the shelf or boxes clearly labeled. The point is to serve as this living memory, to facilitate storytelling, asking questions in ways that enrich the entire Covenant and North Park communities. So, for the 90th anniversary, we're not celebrating well-organized archival collections. We're celebrating some of the research and some of the interaction that happens with those collections. Um, I work at North Park and I have kind of a front row seat to a lot of the work that happens here on North Park's campus. So I'll be doing the presentation on the ways in which the archives has impacted North Park University. Um, and with that, I'll perform the Zoom ritual incantation of sharing my screen. Let's see if we can do this right. And we want to do it like this and like that. All right, and now the prayer. Can everyone see my screen? I see some nods. I see thumbs up. Very good. Um, okay, no, the question is, can I advance my slides? Yes, I can. So that's me. I'm going to talk about how North Park University has understood its three distinctives. Those distinctives are Christian, city-centered, and intercultural via some archival resources. And as much as possible on a Zoom presentation, I'm going to try to show more than tell, just to let you look at archival resources of many different kinds. Um, I want to underscore that I'm an archivist and not a historian, so my job focuses on collecting, um, organizing, describing, preserving, and providing access to records of lasting historical significance. So I'm going to leave the history writing to the historians. I'm content to provide access to the records and ask questions and start conversations. So this will not be a definitive history of North Park. This will be a look at North Park distinctives via some of the archival records that have been preserved, and in ways that invite conversation and reflection. Despite the Zoom nature of this, I'm convinced that this looking best happens in person, so consider this an invitation to come to the archives and see it for yourself. The first distinctive I want to talk about is the Christian distinctive. And in some ways, this is the easiest distinctive to talk about because it's been consistent since the very beginning. But of course, how North Park understands its Christian identity must be an active and ongoing conversation. But guiding these conversations, I think, are some things that are set in stone. This has a metaphorical sense, but I'm a literal person, so I'm going to take the question very literally, which is how can we understand North Park's Christian distinctive via things that are literally set in stone around campus? This is one thing that's set in stone. This is the cornerstone of Old Main. It was laid in 1893 and is Psalm 111, verse 10, which is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. These words are in Swedish, which reflect the fact that North Park was founded by Swedish immigrants, a topic I'll return to later. This cornerstone makes it clear that education at North Park has something to do with theology. And this verse was not just meaningful in the past. The verse, now in English, is still at the center of campus. Here it is on the compass there. I was thinking about making this a quiz, but I don't want to put anyone on the spot. There are three other verses etched in stone at the center of the campus. Here they are. One is test everything, hold fast to what is good. That's First Thessalonians 5:21, which I think reflects North Park's openness and commitment to academic freedom to test all ideas. The next one is I am a companion of all who fear you. Psalm 119:63. And that's an echo to the very founding of the Evangelical Covenant Church and a commitment to hospitality to all students. Lastly, is Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? So North Park's Christian distinctive is an active conversation, one I think Tony Zamble will add to at the end of the presentation, but it has a rich history that guides these conversations. Um, a few more quick notes here. So North Park is a Christian university, but it is a broad Christian liberal arts school. And you can see this in the test everything verse, and I think if you look closely in other places on campus. This is one of my favorite things. This is on the side of the building that we now call Hamming Hall. It's a stone inset in the brick, and this is a person reading, reflecting the academic intent of the school. The fact that it looks like me, I think, is kind of a divine mystery, but I'll accept it as a sign of God's grace. But on that same building, you'll see a image of someone singing. You'll see an athletic scene of someone playing tennis. And this particular stone reflects the first use of the building. What we now call Hamming Hall was the original gymnasium on the campus. And it reflects Nyball's vision that North Park should be a place of holistic education, not just religious indoctrination. There are two other monuments to consider. I think neither of them are in stone, both are in metal. First, this is a statue of Jesus on campus titled Learn of Me. This was created for North Park's campus in 1963. It now stands near Anderson Chapel and again makes clear the connection between faith and learning. Here's an image of the artist standing next to the statue in its original location, which was closer to Carlson Tower. And lastly, this is an image of Lena Sandell sitting outside of Nyball Hall. The statue was dedicated in 1976, so 50 years ago. And many people know this, some likely don't. Lena Sandell was a poet and hymn writer. Some of her best known hymns are Children of the Heavenly Father and Day by Day with Each Passing Moment. Both of these songs reflect some pietistic theology that includes a real intimate understanding of God as parent, God as comforter. So this monument, in my mind, reflects the unique historical tradition of the covenant, which is formed in Reformation and pietistic tradition, a group of mission friends focused on personal faith, scripture, and church reform more than doctrinal arguments. So to me, Lena represents kind of a unique North Park approach to Christian education. And throughout history, actually, Lena has shown her North Park spirit in different ways. including here when she is dressed up to celebrate one of North Park's men's basketball championships in the 70s and 80s. So that's a little bit about how I see North Park's Christian distinctive in things that are set in um, in stone and in metal here on campus. Um, we'll move on to the city center distinctive, which I'll talk about by talking about the name North Park. So the font here for North Park doesn't fall within the current NPU style guidelines. It's actually borrowed from one of the earliest campus maps we have. So here is a map of the North Park addition to Chicago. Um, Obviously, worth noting that Native Americans have been living in this area far before Swedes ended up here. Um, Also worth noting that while North Park has really long connections to the city of Chicago, we actually didn't start in Chicago. The first few years of existence, from 1891 to 1893, the school was in the basement of a church in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Um, we actually have very few archival records from that time, but one campus location reflects that early history, which is the 1891 Bread Company. It's the cafe on the first floor of the Johnson Center, named in honor of our starting date. But back to the map, I love it for a few reasons. One is it kind of shows, I think it's the earliest time in which I've seen North Park put on a map in connection to the city of Chicago. The map also makes it clear that the term North Park referred first to the neighborhood and then to the school. On the lower corner of the map, the school is simply listed as Covenant School, referring to what is now the Evangelical Covenant Church. And the stone etching above the main entrance, SEMC, also reflects the original name of the school at the time. So the name of the school, North Park, is very much tied to our Chicago location. And you can see it, actually, the image on the map is pretty close to what was built. Um, so we decided to move from Minneapolis to Chicago in the mid 1890s. And that was complicated, but since that time, North Park has existed at the corners of Kedzie and Foster, though actually we predate the street name of Foster by a few years. This seems obvious, but at several points in North Park's history, leaders considered moving the school. The most recent serious conversation was in the late 1970s. A suburban location was offered that might offer the school more room to expand, and there were concerns about the surrounding Albany Park and North Park neighborhoods. But in the end, the school announced, we're staying here. And acting president Arthur A.R. Nelson noted, the decision noted, this decision is an expression of our faith in Chicago. We are renewing our commitment to the city and to the spiritual values of our founders' sense of mission and education. So our location and our faith are connected here. Being Christian and being city-centered inform each other. And the Chicago Tribune covered it this way. If the school left the city, it would lose its rich diversity of students. So North Park's commitment to interculturalism is also deeply connected to its commitment to the city of Chicago, which leads to the last of the distinctives, intercultural. We've already seen this, but North Park's Swedish history is set in stone on the side of Old Main. Another way to see that early history and the interesting history related to the names is via the academic catalog from 1896. The cover has both names of the school, the Swedish Evangelical Mission Covenant College and Seminary at the top, and the North Park College in the center. Both of these headings are in English, while the main text of the catalog is in Swedish. So again, we can see North Park as a Swedish school serving immigrants and the children of immigrants in an American context. Over the coming decades, North Park became a more American institution. And one way to see this, I think, is via North Park's homecoming traditions. Last year was the 100th homecoming. We have some records related to that 1925 homecoming. This is a program from a few years later, from 1933. As you might have guessed, homecomings aren't Swedish traditions like fika and meatballs, but are an expression of American identity. So this program is wonderful, I think, for a few reasons. One, it features just a great North Park logo. I mean, I love it. And then it also features this image of Old Main with an American flag on top, which, to the best of my knowledge, there was not a flagpole like that on top of Old Main. And it was there to communicate some form of patriotic identity. And we don't have the menu for the dinner that was served at North Park Covenant Church that year, but early homecoming menus from the 20s and the 30s consistently feature a dinner of catered roast chicken, which again strikes me as very American food. Um, so we see North Park moving more towards this Swedish American institution with all the dynamic meaning that's carried in the hyphen between Swedish and American. I think this was true through the early 1960s. North Park as a predominantly white institution with some expressions of Swedish history and identity. But by the late 1960s, the student body began to diversify, and students organized to bring North Park more fully into our current understanding of diversity. So in 1969, African American students organized to form the Black Student Association. This is a page from a yearbook, and this is an image of the Black Student Association in 1970. A little over a decade later, in 1982, Latino and Latina students organized to create La Unidad Latina. And here's a newspaper article announcing that organization. We see some themes of breaking barriers and bringing more open-mindedness and respect for others through learning. And then all these histories and traditions are represented in the 1982 academic catalog, which lists the Swedish Club, the Black Student Association, and the newly formed Latin Student Organization here. A few years later, in 1986, the Spanish Club actually offered tacos at homecoming. So we can see how even in the homecoming menu have been changed by North Park's increasingly diverse student body. Um, and these students continue to organize. So by the um, late 1990s, there's a whole host of different student groups. This is a screenshot of the earliest version of the northpark.edu web. Excuse me. This is a screenshot of the earliest version of the northpark.edu website that's been archived. It's from January of 1998, and it shows how the cultural organizations had evolved to that point. Unsurprisingly, these groups have continued to evolve, grow, and change since 1998. So we've explored North Park's distinctives by looking at things etched in stone, carved in metal, by looking at campus maps, academic catalogs, reports, correspondence, the North Park Press, old homecoming programs and menus, and even an archived version of the North Park website. All of these and more are records that together tell some of the story of North Park University, and most of these records are preserved here in the F.M. Johnson Archives and Special Collections. I should note, I actually don't do anything to preserve the cornerstones or the buildings on campus. I leave that to Fisplan and Carl Wiestrom, but I think with the exceptions of the stones, everything else comes from the archives here. So these distinctives, I think, are really important and are helpful ways to think about North Park's history. But as Tony Zamble has reminded me, these are not the mission of North Park. So I'm going to invite Tony Zamble, who is the Senior Director of Mission and Ministry here at North Park, to share a bit of his research on the mission of North Park through history. So with that, I will stop my screen share and invite Tony to share his.
All right. Thank you so very much, Andy. And thank you all, good fine folks, for joining us. I have just, my understanding is I have only 3 minutes, so I'm going to be as quick as I can. I need to figure out how to share that particular slide with you. Here. Okay, this is what I want. All right. I wonder if you can see the screen that says Mission and Academy. Perfect, great. So I've been intrigued, given my new role, about how the mission has evolved over time. because I grew up in a culture where history is so important, even though everything is oral in nature, back traditionally. It's a culture that gave us the Sankofa as we know it today. And so I thought it would be helpful for me, for my own education, to learn a little bit more about how the mission of North Park has evolved over time. And so I took three snapshots. The first one comes, as you can see, from around 1960, when North Park was still an academy. And because I'm also part of University Ministries, my interest is always on the core. Let me see if we can, because I see people struggling to see this. Slideshow. Perfect. And you can see there was this intentionality about Christian formation and the formation of the whole person. The intent was each student will be formed holistically, that they would then go into the world and live lives for Christ. There's a centrality, and there's no mistake about what the founders and the people at the time thought about the mission with respect to student formation. Essentially, it's a Christian living and vocation. And then as you forwarded to 2009, 2000 no, 1991, there's still a strong desire to connect the church to the Evangelical Covenant Church. And I don't know why they felt necessary to do that, but now I really understand why that first opening sentence is so important, and it's still been in the mission statement today. That we are first and foremost, we need to understand we are a school of the Evangelical Covenant Church, and but still the preparation is to form students in the Christian community to prepare men and women for service in the world. Right. So there's this drive anchored in the Christian faith to form students and move them to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ in society. And all this mimicking the pietistic idea of for God glory and neighbors good. And the last one, which is the current mission statement today, is we are preparing students for life of significance and service through the liberal arts, professional and theological education. The first two, in my opinion, seem to be very clearly defined. Here we have preparing students of life of significance and service, which is not as open, but not as clearly defined as the ones we have in the previous two mission statements. One of the things that I've been impressed by going down there is I've learned two things. One is the real strong commitment of this institution at this formation to be intentionally Swedish, but open to other people. And then the last thing I learned was in someone endowed university ministry at that point. It wasn't called university because they were so concerned about the spiritual life of student on campus that they've gave money $3 million to help build what is now called Anderson Chapel and to endow the ministry program here. So what I've learned, and I would encourage you, as Andy said in the beginning, to visit, because I had no idea any of these documents existed until I decided, oh, I need to learn something more about the mission. I am really encouraged because it seemed to me that this school has been so committed to forming students to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ the society they find themselves in. So I am that's that for me. I am grateful for the opportunity, one, to educate myself and to be able to share briefly what I've learned um, through the last few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy and Tony. I'm jumping in a little bit late, but my name is Hannah Andre, and I serve as a member of the Covenant History Commission and also on faculty at North Park Seminary. And whereas Andy, as archivist, has been hosting and emceeing this series, the Lunch and Learn series, commemorating the 90th anniversary of the archival collections, I'm going to step in to moderate our Q&A so that Andy doesn't have to wear too many hats in this session as presenter. But we do have time for all of you to bring questions or comments to Andy and Tony on the basis of what they've shared or anything that has sparked for you. I'll invite you to either put any question in the chat that you would like one or both of them to address, or to raise your hand through the Zoom function, and we'll call on you to bring your question. Yeah, I see Helen Peterson's actual hand. So let's start there and feel free to queue up questions otherwise. Please, Helen.
Okay, Andy, I've been part of First Covenant in Jamestown all my life. And when the Middle East Conference and the Michigan Conference merged, I was the treasurer of that. And somehow I collected records from the merger of the Middle East and Middle East and Michigan Conference Covenant women for the last 25 years. They're in a box in my basement. Is that anything that you would be interested in?
Definitely.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't seen the box, but that's definitely within our collecting scope. We have records related to the Middle East Conference, Michigan Conference, and Covenant Women. So, yes,
Okay, so basically I mean I have gone through and just gotten rid of a lot of the junk, but I would rather let you see it and then let you get rid of what you don't want.
that sounds good.
How do
Um,
how do I get it to you?
um, Next time you're in Chicago, you could drop it off. Or we
That,
also do receive records by mail all the time.
okay.
Um, so,
Okay, or I could have someone bring it. I just turned 80 and I'm probably not going to be driving to Chicago in anytime in the near future. But if I could get somebody to transport it to Chicago, you could where would they take it? To you?
yeah, I'm in the basement of the Brandell Library here on campus. So you can you can send it to North Park. If you know anyone that's going to Midwinter, I'll be at Covenant Midwinter next week too. So
Okay,
maybe
thank
that'd
you.
be.
That's something I've wanted to ask for a long time and never knew who to ask.
I'm the person to ask.
This is great. Thank you. I
Yeah, no
appreciate
problem.
it.
There's a question in the chat, and then we'll move to Mark and Doreen. But Christy B, who I think you know, Andy, asks, has North Park University put anything into stone or metal on campus in the last 10 to 20 years that reflects who the university is or its identity now?
Huh. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I should confess a lot of that section was drawn from I developed a historical campus tour, which I really recommend actually. I've gotten rave reviews about it. And I like thinking about the built environment and what it says about us. Um, so no, I guess the Johnson Center would be the most recent building that was erected that I think does have echoes of Old Main in it. Um, I'm getting into birding, so they recently put some dots on the window of that building to help the birds see it. And I think of that as one small but pretty concrete way in which we try to be a good neighbor to our feathered friends here in Chicago. So I think of that as something that expresses something of North Park's understanding of its relationship to its neighborhood. But no, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been art on campus or permanent things like that. Um,
Andy, in the chat,
yeah.
Matt Osterkamp asked about
Oh, yeah.
the cross in the Johnson Center prayer room.
Yeah, that would be a good yeah, thanks, Matt. Your check's in the mail for that easy save there. Yeah, there was a large mulberry tree that they needed to take down for the to build the Johnson Center, and my understanding is the wood from that tree was reworked into a cross that's now in a prayer room in that building. So again, kind of some environmental stewardship, Christian identity via the arts. Um, yeah,
Mark.
Yeah, am I live?
you're live.
Okay. A couple things regarding that last comment. I think the stones that you showed at the center of the campus, that's within the last 25 years.
Hmm.
Um, the plaque in the center, and then the carving into the stones, the text that you were referring. The other one I would say is that from about 2000, let's see, about 1999, 1998 through 2002 or three, I was in University Ministries, which is the sort of the predecessor department to what uh, is there now. And so I was in the chapel a lot, Anderson Chapel, and you realize there was nothing in there that gave any clue of to Christian faith at all. And talked about that with Carl Balsam, and he ended up commissioning Neil Murray to do that little the cross that now hangs
Mm.
in the center, pretty high up, but it's clear, it's present, and introduces a nice, elegant sort of Christian symbol there. There was also on the back wall a large sculpture that Neil Murray did previously that was in a prayer chapel on the seminary of the spirit, uh, sort of descending spirit, sort of crashing into the world. And I think that may have been moved recently, but I'm not sure. But it was on the upper back wall within the chapel.
Mhm.
That was originally done by Murray back in the 1970s, probably. There's a story behind that. It was sort of during the anti-war movement period, you know.
Mm.
W. Clement Stone agreed to pray for this prayer chapel. He was president of Combined Insurance Company and sort of this minor celebrity, a buddy of Richard Nixon. And he was also a friend of Paul Brandel. And so he offered to pay for this prayer chapel. I think Brandel probably got that. And then he came to visit it and he saw this spirit. And I think he balked at paying for it or something. I mean, he was very unhappy with it because he thought it was a peace symbol. And even though this was somebody that went to church every Sunday, from what I understand, it didn't make the connection between the spirit and all that. The other thing I would say in terms of mission, the North Park mission statement. After University Ministries, I ended up in enrollment management at the school for quite a while, and so that's a role where you're constantly explaining the mission of the institution, and to prospective students, parents, groups, individually, and it's just really critical. And I think that the heart of the mission statement right now it's on a plaque. This is another place that's a fairly recent addition. I think it's still up there. In Old Main, you go in the lot right across from the elevator door. There's this mission statement that is there. And that was not there 30 years ago. That mission statement really came out of the work of David Horner that sort of positions it within the church. The actual mission statement part of that statement is really at the center, which is to prepare students for life of significant service. The first part says who we are. The last part says how we do it, liberal arts, theology, and stuff. But the mission statement is that core thing. And I used to say, I'd tell parents, groups, This is a campus where if you walk around the campus and stop the student and said, "What's the mission of the school?" 90% of the time they would tell you to prepare students for lives of significance and service because it was talked about time and time again. It was consistent. It was short. You could remember it. And um, the last thing I would just add is that just before Horner left, we brought in a consulting firm to do some marketing analysis in that. Richard Harrison Bailey out of South Bend at that time. Now it's in Indianapolis. They did a huge study. They met with faculty, staff, alumni, donors, students, everybody. Came back into the board meeting to report. And there was a time when, because of my relationship to the sort of the hierarchy, was in this meeting. And they said, North Park we work with a lot of Christian schools. And I mean, they worked with the premier Christian schools around the country. And he says, and North Park's different. And we think we've come to understand why you're different. It's your relationship and your rootedness in your church. And they'd met with church people also, denominational leaders and all that, pastors. And we think you should call what you do here what it is. It's a covenant education. And then they said, here's the 4 or 5 things that we think comprise that education. And it was like, it was amazing. For me, it was like, yes, somebody finally has named something that we've always had trouble describing. Usually it used to be, well, we're the best kept secret. Well, what in the world's that? No, that's not a help. And well, that made its way into the undergraduate view book, but it ended up being a little box on about page 3 or 4. And I thought that, well, they got the basic idea right, but not the elements of it were not quite right. Well, then Horner left, and there was an interim, a couple presidents, shared president, 3 people were shared that office. And we needed to redo the yearbook or the view book. We ran out. And I thought, okay, this is a chance to elevate this idea. And so sort of rewrote what they had written, moved it to the opening page, and a different set of 5 or 6 things that were comprised of covenant education. And it was fascinating. Some people were afraid, well, it's going to turn people off. But it didn't. What happened is people would say, yeah, I read that. What is that? And you'd explain it, and they go, oh, I'm Catholic, but I sort of like that. Or I'm Lutheran, but I sort of like that. It had a broad appeal to it. And so that's a long speech, but there's more to that.
Oh,
but that's
yeah, thanks. And I should also say, maybe pull back the curtain a little bit. One of the things I was trying to do today was kind of, again, I don't want to step on Hannah's toes. She's the historian. I was trying to think about the diversity of resources we have and how they can be used to start conversations. So for all of the distinctives, um, you could look at a whole host of sources to get information on that. Like you could look at student demographics, you could look at the writings of North Park presidents. So my focus on kind of the stuff set in stone was just kind of my own angle on it to kind of talk about how North Park understands itself. But there are, admissions view books, faculty reflections on what does it mean to be a Christian chemist or a Christian historian. All would be really valid sources for those sorts of discussions, and ones that do get used. So I was trying to intentionally be as broad as possible in the types of resources I used for this presentation today, including a little personal
That
side quest to use that old North Park website to talk about kind of some of the digital history of the last 30 years or so. Yeah.
that was amazing.
Thanks. Yeah,
Um,
it's a good find.
Yeah, I love that. I actually was thinking about a question that actually builds well off what you were saying, Andy, but I'll pause before asking it to give one final call to everybody. If you have others have questions that they want to raise, please drop them in the chat or raise your hand, whether physically or virtually like Mark has done. But thinking about the sources that the archives preserves and stewards in reference to the three distinctives, I wonder if you could share more, Andy, about how you as an archivist think about the sources you have and don't have with reference to telling specifically the story of North Park's interculturality as that has both evolved and, to some extent, maybe philosophically, points of continuity over time as well. But I know that's something that you think a lot about as an archivist. And even thinking of Helen's question about, like, would you take these records? Like, if you could speak a little bit to the archival world and, like collection policy and both access and limitations of what you have.
Yeah, I mean the yeah. Yeah, a good question. I don't have an answer prepared, so I'll just try out a few maybe. The most interesting things, the areas where I feel most equipped to have these conversations are ones where we have records from a variety of points of view. So thinking about some early intercultural history, we have Carl Olson's presidential records, reflecting on kind of the administrator's response to African American students organizing in the 1960s. We also have articles in the North Park Press that would be the student kind of conversations around those issues. We have the North Park Yearbook that would kind of give an official record of student events. We have the North Park Catalog that would kind of give official descriptions of these groups as they evolve over time. So the moments where we have a variety of different perspectives, I think are the most work to get through and figure out what is there, but ultimately tend to be the most fruitful and interesting to researchers. Um, And then I think that also exposes some of the limitations of the archives in that we tend to collect official records, we tend to collect presidential records of the people in power. Um, but the records of the people, actually experiencing it, the records of people from marginalized groups, we don't have as much of. And that's a real loss for the archives and for the institution. So, and some of those sources that I just talked about, the North Park student paper, the North Park yearbook, just for a variety of reasons are no longer published. So it does give me pause to think about the future. How will future historians understand um, what's happening on campus now? How are we responding to um, a whole variety of current political events. What will the sources be for future historians and archivists? And that's an ongoing challenge that I don't have strong answers to right now, but would apply across the board to covenant things as well.
And
Um,
okay, so let me
yeah.
add one thing. One official source, which is what I use, is the North Park self-study. Right, so
Mhm.
self-study is what they do for accreditation, and those contain a little bit of some information of the evolution of the university in various areas. But I want to leave with one thing. One of the challenges I came away with is how do we preserve our Swedish identity? It's been we live in interesting times, but I came away after reading this how important it was for the founders to preserve that Swedish identity. And so the question for those of us who are here is how do we continue to preserve that? We have SVF connection, that's great, but how do we pass this message on to the current generation of students?
Mhm.
So I think we might need help in terms of how we go about doing that. But it was important for the people who started it, so it ought to be important for us who are here today.
Yeah. And I do feel like even that like has a history to it. I feel like for a while, I think, and I don't think this is necessarily controversial, I think the Swedishness of North Park was viewed as a barrier by some, at least, to diversity. And now I feel it administrators view our unique Swedish history as an asset, as something that allows us to understand, the immigrant experience in a different way, or to understand these things. So I think even like our North Park's part of North Park's intercultural history has been, how do we understand our Swedish history and how do we
Mm.
use it to do something? Um, yeah,
Andy, I want to make sure that Mark's
yeah.
question gets to
Oh,
you, where
no.
he asked about like AV sources. Like, to what
Yeah.
extent in the archives do you have, and are these sources available, early video and audio
Hmm.
from chapel commencement, maybe, yeah, sports, like other things? I know you work on that.
Yeah, I'll brag a little bit before delivering the bad news. Several years ago, we got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to help us inventory and assess our audiovisual collections. So at this point, we have pretty strong intellectual control of our collections, which means we tend to know what we have in what format. And just to ballpark some numbers, we have about 800 films, like circular films in the metal cans. About 1,000, more than 1,000 bits of like VHS or beta or U-matic tapes. We have about 2,200 audio cassettes. And again, these reflect they're majority North Park and Covenant. So we have those things, and I kind of know where they are on our shelves. But for audio visual, that's just a piece of it. You can't easily um, play a audio cassette tape from 1978. You need to get it digitized, and that is costly to do, cost prohibitive to do as a collection. So for the last several years, we've been both scanning audiovisual materials on demand. So if a researcher wants something, we can scan it and make it available to them. And then also pursuing other grants to digitize portions of our collection. So I saw in the chat last year we got a grant to digitize some audio of a Covenant pastor named Doug Cedarleaf. Prior to that, several years ago, we got a grant to digitize some oral histories done by a woman named Dorothy Van, who lived in the neighborhood and worked in the library here, actually. And those are two really awesome collections that are, even show some of the diversity of the audiovisual resources we have. Um, if anyone's going to Covenant Midwinter, some archival footage is going to be used in a documentary about Covenant World Relief. Um, So there are these really exciting uses that I think are really fun to watch. But honestly, it's really challenging because it's really expensive to digitize it. You get these massive digital files that are hard to manage. And there's just so much material that's otherwise inaccessible. Like if a book or a letter sits on the shelf for 40 years, I can just easily pick it up and look at it and figure out what it is. But if an audio cassette sits on the shelf for 40 years, you have to like invest money and time to actually figure out what it is. Is it readable? What do we have here? So, um, yeah, so it exists. These audiovisual resources exist, not in a comprehensive way, but I tend to have a pretty solid inventory of what's on our shelves in the back. But then providing access to them is kind of a second step that's just quite frankly way trickier for audiovisual stuff than it is for books or paper. Kind of a long answer there. Sorry. And I'll say one more thing just to talk about how hard my job is. Um, I thought the films would be the biggest problem, that would be the highest priority from a preservation point of view. But since have talked to people and learned from people that actually digital material, things on floppy disks, things on DVDs, on CDs, is actually more vulnerable from a physical preservation point of view. So we've actually reprioritized things to deal with our physical digital media before some of our older audiovisual material based on the fact that that content might be lost quicker than the film content. So if anyone has a check for $1 million and they're trying to figure out who to send it to, the North Park Archives would be a great spot, I have to say for myself. That would solve some problems of our audiovisual preservation.
Well, I think that could be a great note to end on as a call for checks. But I am gonna make just a few announcements and then heads up, Andy and Tony, I'm gonna pass it back to you in case you want like a final word to close us out with reference to the content. But thank you to Tony, thank you to Andy for the presentation, and Andy to the terribly hard, no, the
Mhm.
valuable work that you do in making those sources available
Mhm.
to be able to tell the story of North Park and other ministries and institutions. So looking ahead, on February 11th will be the next event in this series commemorating the 90th anniversary of the archives, and we'll be joined by Bryce and Bonnie Nelson. Um, Andy mentioned the anniversary of Covenant World Relief. They will be sharing on their projects to tell the history of that ministry. Um, and I think, well, yeah, and using the archival sources, highlighting especially what is available through the extensive digital collections that Andy and archivists before him have been
Mhm.
building, which makes the collections available much more broadly than the physical reading room. So, in follow-up from this event, you'll receive an email with a link to the registration for the next event in our series. So we hope you'll join us then. And I'll pass it now back to Andy and Tony for final parting words.
Tony, do you have any parting words?
Yes, I am I'm sort of invited to be part of this, so I find myself very grateful to have had the opportunity to read some of the stories and the history that has formed this institution, and we still have an opportunity to apply for a grant from NetView about telling your institutional saga. So now, so I look like I'm actually having an answer to the challenge I raised. How do we highlight and promote our Swedish history as we seek to invite more and more people into this North Park experience? So pray for us as we try and form a new generation of folks who are global minded, but they are rooted somehow, or at least cognizant of the Swedish underpinning of North Park University as an institution. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Tony. I don't have a parting word, but I guess my parting word will be like converse, as I said in the opening, like the point of the archives is not to have things neatly organized on the shelf. The point is to have these primary sources that can facilitate conversations, questions that help guide the future. So things like this um, are wonderful and are really life-giving, and it's good to hear people's experiences and history with this institution in ways that look to the future and guide us. So thanks for coming, and I hope to see you all next month for the Covenant World Relief one. All right. Thanks all.
Bye.